Let's head slightly north to Athens, Georgia. That's where Kirby Smart and company hosted some top talent over the weekend, as they often do. And it has already garnered results by way of commitments, as it often does. So there is a lot to talk about with the Dogs. That is where we head next on the show to welcome in Ben Wolk of Dogs 24/7. So excited that he is here. Two top 247 commitments already happening from this weekend's visit. Defensive lineman Christian Garrett committed yesterday, and then today Todd Robinson, the four-star athlete, committing. What can you tell us coming from those commitments?
Well, Christian Garrett is probably the top 24/7 prospect that is closest to the University of Georgia. He plays at Prince Avenue Christian just outside of Athens, and so he's had every opportunity throughout the recruiting process to visit Georgia. He's been very familiar with them ever since they've offered him last May. When I spoke with Christian last night, he said that really when he got that offer last May, he had the sense that Georgia was probably the team to beat, but he wanted to fill out the entire recruitment. He actually had 4 official visits set for June. Clemson the first weekend, and then he went to Georgia this past weekend. He had 2 other visits to Georgia Tech and Tennessee that he's no longer going to be taking because he did not leave Kirby Smart's office on Sunday night without letting him know that he wanted to commit to Georgia. Really good defensive lineman. I think he's got some versatility to play inside, probably will start outside. There's a lot of really good defensive linemen in the state of Georgia this year. I think that Georgia has a chance to land a good bit of them, and Christian Garrett is a great place to start. With Todd Robinson, he's someone that we have listed as an athlete. Georgia at one point recruited him as a running back. I think that after his camp 2 weeks ago at Georgia and just him letting the staff know that he really views himself more as a defensive back at the next level than on the offensive side of the ball, Georgia has really shifted to recruiting him as a defensive back. He camped with Travaris Robinson 2 weeks ago. They loved what they saw from him during that camp. He officially visited this past weekend, and another guy that didn't leave campus without letting Georgia coaches know that he wanted to commit. Within less than 24 hours, he went public with that decision as well. For Georgia to close down both of those recruitments here early in June. Huge recruiting wins for in-state prospects, and I think that it really sets the tone for what should be a really good summer for Georgia with in-state recruiting.
And they're already rolling. I have to ask you about the biggest name on campus, and I'm just going to throw it out there, maybe the biggest guy on campus this weekend too, and the number 3 player in the class, offensive tackle David Sanders. Where do things stand with him and the Dogs?
Well, you're exactly right about that. I mean, coming into the weekend, he was the biggest prospect, or the prospect that people probably had their most eyes on. He's been one of Georgia's top recruits the entire 2025 recruiting cycle. That dates back several years. And he's someone that's, again, like Christian Garrett, like I mentioned previously, he's been at Georgia for junior days, for spring practices, for games. He was at the scavenger hunt just a few weeks ago in May. And so someone that Georgia has made a serious priority. I would not say that Georgia is the leader coming out of this visit. I wouldn't say that there is a clear leader coming out of this visit. I think that Ohio State, Tennessee, and Georgia, to me, have emerged from the pack. I know that Clemson is hanging around there as well, and he did officially visit there at the beginning of the month. I think the big thing for David on this visit to Georgia was he's very close with Georgia commit Mason Short. They have gone on many visits throughout the recruiting process together. That's included visits to Clemson. That's included visits to Georgia. They were there, again, for the scavenger hunt a few weeks ago together. Mason's going to be on his official visit this upcoming weekend, but he elected to come on an unofficial visit to join David this weekend as well to help recruit him too. And so I think that certainly plays a part, though that's not going to be the deciding factor.
And I really want to know more about the scavenger hunt, but it says in the rundown that I have to ask you more about what happened over the weekend. Outside of David Sanders and the 2 guys who have already committed, who are some other big names on campus this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, well, for the second weekend in a row, Georgia hosted 15 official visitors, and that's just kind of the way of the summer now in Athens. They're really focusing all of their official visit recruiting attention on those official visitors, or those June official visitors, and those first 2 weekends especially have really become premier weekends for Georgia. C.J. Wiley, 4-star wide receiver from the state of Georgia, 4-star linebacker Tavion Wallace from the state of Georgia. Those are 2 guys from the Peach State that I know Georgia wants really, really badly. CJ Wiley's probably the top wide receiver on Georgia's board. I mean, he's someone that has all of the tools. He had 18 receptions in the highest classification for a state champion in the state of Georgia last year. He's going on an official visit to LSU this upcoming weekend. He's already been on a visit to USC. He's got Florida State at the end of the month. I think that those teams have sort of materialized as the primary factors. I do happen to like where Georgia stands coming out of this visit for Wiley. For Wallace, he's one of Georgia's top linebackers. Georgia added 5-star linebacker Zayden Walker last week. There's only so many spots to go around at linebacker. Tavion Wallace is absolutely one of the ones that Glenn Schumann wants to bring into the class. I was told it was a very successful weekend. I think that there was a narrative coming into the weekend that Florida State had this significant lead that others couldn't catch up to. And I think that that was probably a little misguided, not to say that Florida State doesn't have as much of a shot as anyone in this, and they still have their official visit coming up as well. But this is someone that I think Georgia did a really, really good job with this past weekend. Like I said, with 15 guys on campus, there's plenty of people to point to. Another in-state offensive lineman, Dontrell Glover, is someone that I think Georgia has a really good opportunity to bring into the class by the end of June, early July, probably more likely as a timeline. But DJ Pickett, Eric Winters, a couple of out-of-state defensive backs. I mean, again, it was a very star-studded weekend in Athens. It's probably going to be the case this upcoming weekend as well.
You teased it, this upcoming weekend, and let's just look at the summer as a whole. What's ahead for Georgia recruiting?
So these next 2 weekends are going to be big. I mean, these last 2 weekends, I think Georgia got some answers in terms of guys that either have already announced that they're going to be in the class or guys that they think are trending towards being in the class potentially. And so these next 2 weekends are really filling out the rest of that group. Which offensive linemen are you feeling good about from the early weeks? Where, what position groups might you feel like you have some gaps that you need to fill these last 2 weekends? That's really what these next 2 weekends are for. I think this upcoming weekend, June 14th to 16th in particular, there's a handful of guys that I would point to that really intrigue me. First and foremost, Bryce Davis from North Carolina, one of Georgia's top edge rushers targets in this recruiting class. Georgia already has one edge committed in Darren Akinnigbon. They're very much in the thick of things with Isaiah Gibson from Warner Robins, Georgia as well. But Bryce Davis is someone that Georgia has quietly been, very much in control of the recruitment throughout this process. So I think that he's someone that I'm very curious to see how next weekend goes because he has been trending in the right direction for Georgia for a long, long time. Jamarian Morrow is a running back that I bring up, especially because Bo Jackson recently committed to Ohio State. And I think there have been some questions, in the Georgia world of who is Georgia going to pair at running back with Bo Walker. There are a few options out there. They're not going to stop recruiting Bo Jackson. There's Usmani Kroma from the state of Georgia. But Jamarian Morrow is someone from Tennessee that Georgia went to go see during the evaluation period. When Josh Crawford came on board as Georgia's running backs coach from Georgia Tech, this was someone that he had been recruiting to Atlanta. He's now recruiting him over to Athens, just a couple of exits away. And, I'm intrigued to see how this one goes. He's the first running back that Georgia will have on campus for an official visit since Bo Jackson committed to Ohio State. And so I think it'll be really telling to see how much does Georgia push for him? What are Georgia's chances with him? What are some of the other contenders, in this battle? But I think that that's a really intriguing name for me. Just a couple of other guys that will be on campus. Dijon Lee is a defensive back from California, and Luke Metz is an Alabama linebacker commit that recently picked up a Georgia offer, and he's someone else that, again, things are new between him and Georgia, just recently picking up the offer, but we'll see how this weekend goes in Athens.
I love it. Ben, thank you so much for unloading the notebook for us. Believe it or not, that's probably just scratching the surface of everything happening with Georgia recruiting, so we appreciate you coming on our show and keeping us updated on all of it. As always, if you want the latest updates, you can go to dogs247.com for all things Georgia recruiting. You can get the latest on the upcoming visits, and of course, it will be here before we know it. Get ready for the upcoming season.